So, hello everyone, welcome to today's Scalarama meeting. How are we all? Well, we're all muted, first of all. So just a quick reminder of our roundtable etiquette for people who are new. You're all muted to begin with, but we'll open up to hear from everyone towards the end of the meeting, so don't worry if you've got some questions or things. If you do have any questions or comments throughout the meeting or the chats, please do use the chat bar. We've developed a bit of a shorthand over the last couple of months on these sessions, so if you agree with a point, you can put a little plus sign in the chat. Thank you to Tamara from Take One Action Film Festival for that tip. We really do welcome all contributions from everyone in the room, but I would ask that you be respectful and thoughtful in anything that you may say. So for those of you who maybe don't know me, for you that might be your first session with us, I'm Megan Mitchell. I'm the producer of Matchbox Cine Club, and I've been coordinating the Scalarama Scotland's online sessions, thanks to funding from Film Hub Scotland. This is the fourth in 6 monthly sessions that we're running this year. So ordinarily these workshops would take place in the wonderful CCA in Glasgow, and they would offer practical advice and networking for new and established independent exhibitors. But of course, due to the world that we're now living in, we're taking everything online and doing just fine. It's been a pleasure to be joined by colleagues from across the UK and North America and Europe over the past months. And you can check out our previous sessions on our website, which I think Sean's going to link in the chat. Just a slight note, I have a vocal tic, so when I'm talking I may squawk like a bird, and it can be quite high-pitched if you're wearing earphones, so just a little note on that. So today we're joined by a really great group of guest speakers. We'll be hearing from Anthony Andrews from We Are Parable, Mohamed, Clare Reddington from Watershed, and Toki Allison from Inclusive Cinema about insights and practical ways that we can make our thinking, events and our organisations a wee bit more inclusive, especially when it comes to race. So unfortunately, Samar Zayavit from Dardishe is unwell and can't be with us today, but we're going to share links to their website in the chat for everyone to check out. If you don't know Dardishe is a great Glasgow-based community-focused scene and arts festival that showcases Arab and North African women's contribution to contemporary art and culture. So Zamara established Dardishe, but she also works across Glasgow Zine Library and the Scottish Queer International Film Festival. So hopefully we can hear from Zamara in another session in the future. But thanks to the wonders of the internet, you can also attend a Dardishe screening this Thursday. Dardishe will be screening Nalia and the Uprising, a documentary that chronicles Palestinian women's critical contributions to the most vibrant and non-violent mobilisation in Palestinian history, the first Intifada in the late 1980s. Tickets are on a sliding scale to what you can afford, and the screening's Thursday from 2 PM. So we'll share some links to the tickets and events. If you can't make it and you do have a platform, we've also shared a tweet from Dardishe that you can retweet if you're so inclined to spread the word. So before we get into today's roundtable, I just wanted to acknowledge how intense the past month since we last met have been, especially for our Black colleagues. I'm going to share some resources in the chat box, especially to the film and TV charity who have an online platform called White Wall with discussion boards and resources, as well as their 24-hour helpline and online chat. If you are feeling overwhelmed, please do reach out and seek some support if you need it, and it's okay to do that. So usually in our intro, before I kick off into the roundtable, I'll share some interesting news and updates for exhibitors. But there was one important document that I wanted to share this week this month before we kick off. With Black Lives Matter movement bringing racism to the forefront of discussions globally and within our sector, and with white people who have a privilege to not face this every day, we may feel like there's some things that we can still learn, and there's certainly some things that we can be doing better to address this in the section. And I say we as a white woman in a white organisation of two white people, in Scotland, where our sector is blindingly white, and at best this does a disservice to our audiences and our non-white colleagues, and at worst it facilitates and perpetuates violence towards them. I wanted to share Gemma Desney's "This Work Isn't For Us," which is a very insightful and challenging document in regards to this, and I would urge everyone to dive into it and examine their own practices and complacencies when it comes to race in the creative industries. But today's guests are already doing things to bring about and move forward practical change and modelling ways we can do better in some really exciting and fun ways, especially our first guest. So I'm going to invite Anthony from We Are Parable to tell us a wee bit about We Are Parable, and I think that he's got a little slideshow as well to share with us. Hello.
Hello. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So I think you guys have got the slides, so I'm just going to present and just tell you where to go. Is that right?
Yeah, Sean, are you happy to fire up the slide and screen share? Here we go. Wonderful.
Cool. Okay. So yeah. So thanks to Megan and the team for having me today. Thank you all for joining. So my name is Anthony Andrews, and I'm the creative director and co-founder of a company called We Are Parable. And over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you a little bit about We Are Parable, what we do, why we exist, and tell you a little bit why we believe experience over everything is the mantra that we follow, and something that our audience really relate to. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So who we are, essentially, I'm Anthony Andrews. In that image is my wife and co-founder, Tian Andrews, and essentially we are an award-winning film exhibition company. And we've been going since 2013, when we had the idea of screening one of our favorite films, Coming to America, which we hadn't seen in the cinema before. So we thought, let's go and go to our local cinema and see if we can screen this film. Somewhat serendipitously, the film was celebrating its 25th anniversary, which gave us another reason to try and do something different with the screening. So we thought, rather than just essentially stick people in the cinema and show the film, we thought, let's try and create an immersive experience where we had rose bearers and African arts and crafts makers and poets and performers and musicians, and really try and immerse people in the African culture and, more importantly, the environment of the film. And that's something that we've been doing for the last 7 years, really just trying to build on the environment of a film and make it as immersive and culturally relevant as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So, you know, why we exist is really important. So we believe in championing films that feature and are made by people that look like us. So essentially, Black films for Black people. And what we want to try and do when we screen those films is to create experiences, as I just mentioned before, those culturally relevant experiences around the films, which feature people that look like us, that celebrate our culture as much as possible. So you're seeing a celebration of culture on screen with Black faces and hopefully, you know, Black filmmakers and writers and directors and producers behind the camera. And what we try and do is, as an extension of that celebration, is to celebrate the culture when you go into the foyer, when you go and take your seat, to really, you know, to really bring out the cultural relevance of the film. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So our mission is really clear, and this, you know, this is our North Star when it comes to everything that we do. So essentially, it's to provide audiences across the UK with opportunities to experience and respond to Black cinema in culturally relevant, innovative, and memorable ways. So that's really what we do for everything. We really want people to understand the culture and really try and celebrate that in as many ways as possible. We want to be innovative in how we do that. So sometimes it might be something as sort of conventional and simple as a Q&A where we discuss key themes of the film, or it could be something like the example I'm about to show you, which is a bit more expansive and a bit more ambitious. So that leads quite nicely into the next slide, where the best example of how we provide those culturally relevant moments, or it's actually the slide after, but how we do it is by screening films and creating memorable and unforgettable experiences. And the best example of that is Black Panther, or as many people call it, the People's Premiere. So what we did with this event, the BFI and Disney approached us about doing an event for Black Panther, which would be the world's first public preview screening of the film. So what we thought, again, we wanted to really have that immersive environment and, you know, really try and bring people into the environment of the film. So we had the idea of creating an Afro-futuristic kingdom. So to that end, we would have cosplayers, as you can see in that image. We'd have an African arts and crafts marketplace with interior designers, craft makers, writers, fashion designers, really trying to bring the best of Africa to the BFI South Bank as much as possible. And we wanted to really try and place our guests in Wakanda in the film. You know, the film very much celebrates Wakanda as this African utopia. And that's what we tried to do with this particular event. So what was really groundbreaking about this event is that it was about creating a space for Black people. This is the first event that we did with the BFI South Bank, and from that event to other events that we've done in that space recently, people always call us up and say, okay, you're doing an event at the BFI South Bank, what's the dress code? So there's a lot of people within our audience, primarily Black people, who have never been to the South Bank, who don't think that it's a space for them, despite it being a publicly funded space and organisation. They simply feel that the space isn't for them. And we're really here to try and break that stigma down, to say that, no, this space is for you, and this is content that's here for you. So, you know, with these 700 attendees and with the other people that we've been able to attract to our events, we really want to try and create confidence in our audience that this is a space for them and they can be celebrated in that space. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the Seoul Film Festival is, again, another extension of the work we do, where we're trying to create culturally relevant experiences. And this is a film festival that we co-founded with 4 other creatives. And this was the event that we did in August last year with some of our short filmmakers. Essentially, the Seoul Film Festival is all about giving a platform to Black British filmmakers as much as possible. So if you look at what's happened with BAFTA So White, you look at, I don't know if you guys have read Steve McQueen's piece in The Guardian that came out last night, just about, you know, the inherent racism that's in the film and TV industry. When you take all of those things into account, you see why it's so important to have platforms like this where we're celebrating our Black British filmmakers as much as possible. There's no reason why these films can't exist on the BFI player, for example. There's no reason why these films cannot show on Random Max and Channel 4. So what we're trying to do is to create a platform that allows these things to happen. We have got partners such as Channel 4, such as Sony, where we're working with them continually, again, to try and expand the platform and try and give these filmmakers the opportunities that they deserve to extend their careers and grow their work as much as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We also worked with E1 on the Queen and Slim campaign at the start of the year, which feels like absolutely years ago. So we worked with E1 not only on a special preview event that we did at the BFI South Bank, where we sold out the screen in record time, but we also did 4 other screenings. So we were the marketing partners for that campaign, where we targeted a younger audience, and we hired an intern to provide her with some film exhibition experience of how to market an event and how to promote and work on producing a number of events. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we hosted 5 screenings around London. We worked with that intern, and we also created some pre-events where we worked with a zine-making facilitator, arts facilitator, who held free zine-making workshops where we were making montages from from particular images, Black images from magazines, and sort of creating them to sort of have themes such as love, fear, hope. Some of the themes that were explored in the film, again, to allow people to have a deeper relationship with the film. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So at the BFI South Bank, where we did the main preview, as I mentioned, we sold out the capacity in about 10 minutes. We had a poetry session from a young person in the round, as you can see in the top image, who, it was the first time she had performed to such a massive group of people, and she did amazingly well. We had a photo booth set up so people could reenact the same iconic image that was depicted in the film. And we also collaborated with a whiskey house to produce a one-off Queen and Slim branded bourbon. So if you've seen the film, there's a pivotal scene where the 2 characters are having a drink of bourbon while they're on the run. So we wanted that to be a nice kind of tangible takeaway that the audience could have with them and remind them of the event. So if we go to the next slide, please. So some of the results that we had, so over 5 events, we had almost 1,500 attendees across those 5 events. We had 5.6 million online impressions. We had a calculated online sentiment of around 98%. It was all positive. And then from the 5 screenings that we did, that was 12% of the total preview box office revenue, and that's the biggest sort of amount that we've ever generated in terms of revenue for any 5 events. So we're super proud of that. And we did attract a really diverse, a really young audience who were looking not just to watch the film, because there was so much anticipation about the film. It was about how they watched the film. And I've got some stats a bit later on that talks about why experience is so important, especially for young and Black audiences. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I've got just a few testimonials from people that we've worked with, such as Annabelle Grundy. Some of you may be familiar with her. Just talks about, you know, the purpose and vision that we try and bring to every event. Again, trying to bring the culturally relevant experiences to every event that we do. So the picture there is when we recreated a barbershop, the Desmond's barbershop, Desmond's sitcom from the 90s, where we recreated that shop in spaces all around the UK, and we've got the creator of Desmond's, Trix Worrell, sitting in the chair, and you know, we tried to create that experience while showing episodes of Desmond's. So it's really about trying to, again, provide those moments of cultural relevance for our audience. And the second slide, again, is just another quote from Interfilm. So if we can go straight into the next slide, if possible. So just a few stats to finish up on. So 80% of our audience say that our events provided them with a worthwhile cultural experience. So that's something that I'm saying over and over again, because I think it's massively important. I think when you're trying to attract Black, Asian, and other ethnic groups as an audience, I think it's really about, you know, providing them with authentic cultural moments that really speak to their, you know, speak to their experience as people of color or people of a particular group. And I think that's what we try and do, and that's what we work hard to try and create at our events. So if we go to the next slide. So 99% of our attendees rate our events as very good or good. I'm still working on the 1%. One day I will be able to say very closely, I'll be able to say 100% of people think our event's very good. I'm still working on that 1% of people that don't. So yeah, that's obviously a great stat and something that we work hard to try and maintain as much as possible. And then if we go to the next slide, please. This is probably like my killer slides, because I think this really ties into the idea of experience over everything. So 95% of our audience, an overwhelming amount of our audience, say that experiences, whether those experiences are as simple as a Q&A or their performances or their photo booths or arts exhibitions or art workshops, no matter what they are, they're the most important thing about the event. So, you know, one of the things that I kind of struggle with is the fact that I loved watching the Five Bloods last weekend, despite the new Spike Lee film on Netflix. But I just couldn't help but think, oh my God, how amazing would this be in the cinema with all the other stuff around it? And our audience feel the same way. It's about how you experience the film, not just watching the film and then having thoughts about it. It's about the whole package, and how can you package that up in a way that makes culturally relevant sense to our audience as much as possible. So that's something that we're really happy about, and happy our audience are kind of on the same page with us on that. So I think that brings me to the end of the slides. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Is that the last slide? I'm just trying to remember. That is the last slide. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of what We Are Para will do. But what I would say, you know, when it comes to trying to attract audiences from different ethnic backgrounds, I think, again, it is about, you know, providing that authenticity, that you know, really reflecting their culture back to them. But, you know, if you don't feel that you are confident in doing that, it's about reaching out to groups who are already speaking to those audiences as much as possible. I think there was one other stat that didn't go up, and there was about 80% of our audience are from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic audiences, and we have a third of the audiences from LGBTQ communities as well. So with the LGBTQ communities, we reached out to particular groups within London and Birmingham and Bristol, worked with them to try and attract those audiences. So it's a case of realizing that, you know, we don't know much about that community and about the interests and the, you know, the kind of nuances that are involved in, you know, reaching out to that community. So we worked with organizations who had a much stronger insight. So I would say doing that on a consistent and regular basis is how you really attract these audiences. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much, Anthony. I think that that's such a good point about reaching out and knowing where your limitations are. Like, I think as exhibitors and programmers, we'd all like to think that, you know, because we watch films and, you know, we know it all, but we don't. And I think even for Matchbox over the last year, we've worked with queer classics in Glasgow quite a bit, and we've seen the growth of LGBTQ plus audiences from that initial partnership. And it definitely gave us access to audiences and an understanding of audiences that I don't think that we would have had otherwise. But thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm now going to throw to you may know if you were involved in the BFI's Anime 18 season. Is also an ICO Feds alumni and has presented and written across the industry on cultural blind spots and race. So hello, how are you?
Hi everyone, I'm good, thank you. So I'm gonna be speaking to kind of film organizations in particular, and how they can be more aware of how their own racial backgrounds inform their work and the issues that might arise from that if everybody in the organization is white or the majority is. But just to begin, I guess I should say that when I was preparing to do this, I was kind of thinking very specifically about the moment in time that we find ourselves in. So I think that's really informed how I want to have these conversations going forward, because I'm feeling a lot of frustration at the moment in terms of these conversations. A lot of the times feel like it's like we're talking about racism 101 here, but at the same time I've been kind of heartened to see that I think for the first time really there are conversations about systematic oppression happening in the mainstream, and I really want to support that as much as possible, and champion a kind of a different way of approaching this that really holds people to account for how they benefit from their privilege. So to begin with, like how I believe whiteness informs the work that we do. Just to start with programming, I think, particularly programming in independent cinema, I would say that we are in a kind of unique position, and it's one of the reasons I really love independent cinema, and that is we have the chance and the choice to kind of look back at film history and really give people a chance to see films that they might not see otherwise. And how this relates to race would be kind of using that as a chance to look at films that have been historically ignored for very specific reasons. I was having a conversation with a colleague about a year ago now about this, and it's the thing that kind of stands out to me is the reason why these films have been historically ignored and kind of wiped out of the canon or excluded from the canon is quite clear. It's linked to race, at least. But because that initial erasure was so well executed, we find ourselves in a position where you really have to dig to find these films and find these filmmakers that we want to champion that haven't had that chance. And it's all about priorities, essentially. It's about finding the time and the resources to choose to prioritize these films and not always go for the film that is, well, the films that are most well documented in the canon. And also, I would say programming is also, you can link it to race in the fact that there is this category called Black cinema, and there isn't this category called white cinema. And it's this constant othering which upholds the status quo. And it's this thing of essentially reinforcing this belief that whiteness is neutral and everything else isn't. So when it comes to choosing to program films that aren't Black or don't have a Black cast or a filmmaker, etc., connected to them, I would really kind of urge you all to look at how whiteness is presenting itself in these films. I talk about it a lot with my friends who are also people of color. There are films that I see all the time and I think, oh, wow, that's a really white film. And we know what that means, but it's never articulated in the programming or the marketing of that film in the same way that Blackness is within like program notes and marketing. And when it comes to kind of like community engagement work, I think for me, the issue, I mean, how race relates to this is, I would say it kind of, it's, how do I say this? Like, say you are a predominantly or exclusively white staffed organization who wants to like be a welcoming space for people of color to engage with film. Like the basis to do that in a sustainable way is by building trust, because in essence, what you're asking people of color is when you invite them in is that they will leave any and all interactions with your organization feeling respected and welcomed. So if we're kind of working from those parameters, what I don't see a lot around the discussions that I don't see happening around community engagement is why in the first place did these communities question whether they would be respected or welcome within your organization? And you may think, well, okay, you might kind of bat it back and say, well, these communities are hard to reach and they're not giving us the benefit of the doubt. But in our lived experience, we are really given the benefit of the doubt. So it's coming at it from a different perspective entirely and saying, why should predominantly white organizations be seen as inclusive unless we can pin or identify a very clear example of them not being? So when, well, firstly, the staff itself don't work there, and it's like, that's the first question in my mind, is like, why aren't there any people of color working in this organization, particularly when you're working in cities and communities that are racially diverse. So it's a matter of not asking others to give you the benefit of the doubt and understanding how this systematic kind of problematizing of people of color informs the way that they want to engage with your organization or stops them from engaging with your organization. And then, like, if you to look more into like how you function as an organization, just the simple like concept of professionalism. Like, if I was to ask you all now, considering your organizations, do you think that like the way that you choose to interact both internally and externally like reflects a degree of professionalism? I would assume that many of you would say yes. You would probably say yes because you assume that to be a good thing, something that we should be striving towards. But my perspective personally as a Black woman is I really hate the concept of professionalism. As far as I'm concerned, it exists to create a set of like rules and boundaries that in principle are just meant to make the work environment like more efficient and like conducive to what the organization is trying to achieve. But in practice, like these rules and boundaries have been created with only a certain group in mind. And what that means is that many people who kind of fall out of that certain group, which I don't need to kind of spell out here, find that they have to leave the parts of their authentic selves at the door, so to speak. And on top of that, they have to hold themselves to higher standards than others, simply because they are aware that they will be more harshly judged. And there's kind of no two ways around it as far as I'm concerned. Like Western professionalism is like rooted in white supremacy. And I started to list down a couple of examples to kind of help prove my point here. But going back to what I said earlier, I really want to move this conversation towards a point where people of color are trusted when you say something is linked to or upholds white supremacy, rather than being asked to over-explain why that is the case, because it's our lived experience. So I'd rather focus on the solution. And as far as I can see it, the solution is quite a simple one. It's to start from scratch. It's to develop an office culture or organization culture that everybody in that organization fits into and is able to like equitably say, this is the parameters that I need to be set in order for me to feel like myself at work, and feel like I don't have to kind of uphold this this fallacy that whiteness is the norm. And then I guess the other side of the coin when it comes to organizations, like how you function as an organization and how that links to race, is a lot of conversation at the moment is around wanting to hire more diverse people, and as if that will like solve the issue of like racism in our sector. But as far as I can see it, like that's the first step, not the last step in developing an inclusive organization. And I think too many organizations see hiring diverse staff as the final step. And the reason why I say it's not the final step is because it's quite clear to see, if you were to compare like the freelancers who work in our sector and the people who are linked to organizations, and particularly like well-funded organizations, the group of the freelancers are often a way more diverse group. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people of color recently, and it's actually shocking how many of those conversations have led to people saying, I've chosen to be a freelancer or to set up my own organization because I found the organizations that currently exist are oppressive. Like, point blank period, just are oppressive. Like, we don't see ourselves, we see working in organizations as detrimental to our mental health, let alone like if we were given a chance to work in those organizations. That's a whole nother conversation. It's like the environment is not healthy, and even if you are to, like, if you find an organization and you work within it, so often I see like people of color in the sector being overlooked when it comes to career progression, when their white counterparts aren't being overlooked, and I can see that the talent they have. So it's clearly not to do with them as individuals. And then we have to, I guess, look at the truth of the matter, which is they're being overlooked because they are people of color. So just to kind of like wrap up, I think for me, if as organizations, if you want to check in and see like if you're on the right path with any of this, I think there's a couple of things that need to be done. First of all, really understanding what accountability looks like in practice. Like, I'm sure you've all seen the numerous statements that have come out since Black Lives Matter happened. And it's, the language is so often like, we will listen and we will learn. What's not being said and what I think should be said is, up until this point, we have perpetuated the situation. Like, we are the reason why we are in this situation currently. And it's not being said to protect like reputation, but what's not being understood is, by not saying it in as plain as language as that, you are focusing on how, like, the optics of the situation over the reality. And the reality is, we all know like how you've like supported the situation. Like, we have these conversations amongst ourselves, like we know what's happening. it's time to just come out and say it, kind of thing. And that is absolutely the first step in building like real trust, and inviting the communities that you have marginalized to hold you to account. Like, you can't do that. This is not something that white organizations can do on their own. This is not a situation where the people who have ostracized communities are the ones who are equipped to no longer ostracize. Like, you've already done the damage. Like, it's time to readdress the power imbalances that are at the root of this. Also, I think you really shouldn't, how do I say this? You shouldn't feel good while doing this work. And I say that to say, like, when you are addressing your own privilege, like, that is something that you should like not feel good about. I don't know how else to say. Like, I feel, and I'm saying this, I know this, the topic at hand is like race, and like, I don't have any privilege in that matter. I have privilege in other ways, and I feel like crap about it all of the time. And I think like really like sitting with that feeling is an important part of like addressing it, because so often I see people really like connected to the idea of them being like good people who like, and of course like good people don't uphold systems of oppression, right? And people are so like married to that self-image that instead of sitting with that feeling and acknowledging and listening, what ends up happening is they throw it back to the people who are most affected and ask for examples and evidence to prove their point. And yeah, you're not doing it right if you're doing that. So yeah, I guess I'll finish there. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. There was so much in there. Like, I have like 8 pages of notes, and I think that a lot of what you're saying is conversations that sadly have been had before in the sector. But I do think that you're right in saying that we're in a moment in time where we are seeing certain organisations, maybe institutes of film in Britain, who are putting out these statements to take note of the moment in time, and are saying like, now we're going to be anti-racist. Before we were like not racist, but we don't want to talk about how we weren't racist before. We're just going to now be anti-racist because we've said we're going to be anti-racist, with no real accountability or commitments to change. So I think that you're right in saying that accountability and that discomfort for organisations like that, it should be something that's not easy, and I don't think that these conversations should be simple. So thank you so much for your time. So off the back of that, we're now going to go to an organisation who I've invited in today because I think that comparatively looking at certain institutes of film in Britain's statement compared to that of the Watersheds, where they've set out some clear and public commitments to change, where they do have a timeline of change, is something that's promising. So I'm going to invite Clare Reddington to join us, and she's going to discuss a wee bit about their statement, where they've outlined some of the changes that they're looking to achieve and have went public with in light of Black Lives Matter, but are possible pre-existing commitments. So Clare, are you happy to take over?
Hi, yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to just talk really quickly about where we find ourselves today and about some of the learning that we've gone on over the last couple of years. It very much is a snapshot of how we find ourselves today. I've got no doubt that there is much more. I mean, I know there's much more we can do. We're trying to articulate that. So I was a little bit reluctant to speak today because I think it's sort of, because I don't want to pretend that we've got any answers. But the statement is in the chat, so you can have a look. And I guess what it felt important to me was in the way that has articulated most of what I would like to say already so beautifully, like taking some responsibility for the situation that we find ourselves in and where Watershed has made mistakes. And there are many places where we've made mistakes. In case you don't know who we are, Watershed is a 38-year-old media centre in Bristol. We have 3 cinema screens with a home for the Film Hub Southwest, and and we have Pervasive Media Studio, which is a kind of creative technology research lab. Being in Bristol is an interesting place to be at the moment. It's a city where independent spirit is really highly valued, but where inequality of opportunity has been unchecked for far too long, and where the leadership of the culture sector in no way matches the city's demographic. And partly the response to tearing down the Colston statue is, of course, all of the righteous feelings of that injustice that have been in the city for too long. Our commitment as Watershed's representative programme goes back a really long way. We can look back to partnerships with things like Black Pyramid 26 years ago, and we can look at our audience-facing programmes through the cultural cinema. We can look at what we're doing with Film Hub, Pervasive Media Studio and Rife. We understand diversity is both a social responsibility and an innovation imperative. And yet, our sustained commitment to representative programme only goes to underline, I think, the paucity of progress we've made in the makeup of our own organisation. So whilst 18% of our board is from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background, currently only 7% of our staff is. So whilst I don't think it's the only step we should take, actually making sure that our recruitment is addressed is incredibly important to us. Partly, I think this is about ongoing commitments to diversifying our staff have been held at executive and board level and haven't somehow managed to be spread across the whole organisation. So we're about to move our plans and looking at targets for diversity away from the exec team to create detailed recruitment plans that are held by every manager in every department, because obviously how we might need to address how we recruit in our cafe bar is very different to how we might need to address how we recruit for programme. We think that until we make inclusion an explicit part of how every team understands its own success, we won't be able to move forward. Of course, I wanted to just note that, like many others in the sector, Watershed is suffering pretty badly at the moment. We are facing redundancies and we're not going to be in a position to hire anyone in the near future. But although that's incredibly painful, it seems like a really good time to put all the stuff in place that's needed for when we're going to regenerate and grow. How do we use this time to really think about what are the policies, behaviours, ways of holding ourselves to account, so that then when we do grow again in the future, we'll be able to grow equitably. Watershed's commitments that you see in our statement were made before lockdown by our cross-departmental inclusion group. We take an intersectional view of inclusion and work to try and address barriers across programme, across audiences, and across our own teams. We publish them to hold ourselves to account more publicly than we have done before. And I just wanted to say a few words about things we've learned. So the first is around timescales. So despite the feelings of anger, of responsibility, sadness and guilt that loads of us are feeling at the moment that make us want to change everything overnight, I think it's dangerous to do so. So I'm a person who is always quick to act, but I'm definitely not saying don't act, but to build that trust that is talking about, we need to make tangible commitments and hold ourselves to account. I think if we rush stuff in this area, we might make stuff that only scratches the surface at best, and probably at worst, the unintended consequences of our actions might cause further exclusion. So considering and co-designing with the communities that we want to include seems like the right way to work for me. I've had the absolute pleasure of working with an inclusion producer called Zara Ash-Harper for the last 2 years, who was working at Watershed and she's now freelance. And she talks about slow, loving inclusion, where there is time for healing, for trust building, to understand the context of the change that's needed. And I guess so much of the inequality that we're looking at intersects where white supremacy intersects with capitalism and the patriarchy. We need to really have a think about the kind of interconnected systems that we're looking at and how we can design different ways of working for the long game. So it's vital we ensure our programmes are representative and our staffing reflects the demographic of the UK, but obviously that's not enough. And I think one of the mistakes that lots of white-led organisations are making at the moment is they're looking at how to be more inclusive in their own practice without committing time and resources to strengthen the infrastructure of organisations founded and led by people of colour. We have to ensure that those organisations, that those artists, that those filmmakers are at the table. So we have to ensure that everyone has access to the same opportunities, that people hear about things in the same way. So for Watershed as the funded organisation, I think that means I have to think about how do I leverage all of the resources I have access to? How do I leverage the networks and the systems of experience that I've had the privilege of in the service of that cause, in the service of their cause? And I think for funders, we need to think about how things like match funding at the very beginning creates further systems of inequality of who can apply. So we need to like really redesign the systems at every level. I also wanted to just say something that we learned about the hard work and emotional toll that doing inclusion work takes. So especially for people of colour, if it's your job to mitigate, address and fix the structural barriers that you yourself face on a daily basis in a white organisation, it's going to take an exceptional toll. So I think that we need to ensure that inclusion work isn't done on its own, that it has a support structure that wraps around it, that includes mentoring, emotional support, regular check-ins, and really good ways of dealing with conflict. That's the thing that I don't think that the sector is good at all, is how do we hold competing tensions and conflicts where sometimes intersecting inclusion needs lay in tension with each other. How can we have really good ways of talking that through and supporting the people who really experience this stuff every day? That's probably all I wanted to say for now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Claire. And I think it is really important, like you were saying, about that ability to understand moving forward what the impact is when we do make change, and making change for change's sake isn't necessarily beneficial if we've not fully thought about the structures that change is working within. So we're going to throw to Toki Allison just to reiterate, because there's quite a few people who'd quite like to ask questions. So once Toki's presented a wee bit about the resources that Inclusive Cinema have correlated in light of Black Lives Matter, we will throw to people in the room to ask questions. So if you have a question, you can message myself, Sean, or just drop it in the chat and we'll throw to you. But we'll throw to Toki just now so that she can tell us a wee bit about what Inclusive Cinema has been up to.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, my internet disappeared earlier, so I had to run into a different room. So if it just if it all goes wrong, then somebody wave at me. Just want to say thank you to the three of you for those, really important kind of messages and thoughts. Really, I think it's really important that we kind of maintain the momentum of what people are thinking about at the moment, and that we don't lose this sort of opportunity really to sort of galvanize everybody's attention and kind of create the change that is very, very, very long overdue. So I'm not going to kind of present anything because I think a lot has been said already. I really just wanted to share some resources from Inclusive Cinema. Can I just initially ask, could you either do the plus or do the reaction of like raise your hand or whatever if you have heard of Inclusive Cinema before, because that would just help me be aware of how many people know about it and how many don't. Thank you, that's really helpful. Fab. Just need to know whether I need to do a harder job on the marketing. So this is our website. Can you guys see that? So it's showing up for everybody? Yeah, great. So this is obviously our site, so please feel free at any time to come here and look for stuff. Inclusive Cinema is a Film Hub Wales-led initiative, and it's not just for Wales, it's for the whole of the UK, and we're funded obviously by BFI and part of the Film Audience Network. So This project is something that we deliver on fairly shoestring budget. We put together lots of resources. We try and dovetail in with the other areas of the Film Audience Network, so supporting on kind of programming, on training, and just trying to work as best we can with them and support the membership. So I hope a lot of you are aware of us. I just wanted to show you here that this is kind of not a very intersectional setup, but this is our site at the moment. So if you did want to look specifically around different audiences or areas of concern, this is something you can look at. So you can kind of click on a group, as it were, and then also you can search under different types of kind of action that you might want to undertake as an exhibitor. And I'm just going to hide everybody. And then you can just run a search on our site and you should get a whole load of really nice resources. I'm not going to take credit for a lot of these. We do produce our own how-to guides, but a lot of this is just really great stuff that's already been produced by other people. Apologies if you can hear my dog shouting in the background. So yeah, there's loads of reports on here. Some of them are more current than others. There's also loads of case studies, some useful videos and insights, as well as kind of articles. So please make use of it. And if you feel like things are missing or you're aware of things that you feel we should be championing, then please let us know, because we want to share that with the exhibition sector. So this is the, we put together a very quick resource just as something to reference, just to let everybody know that the Film Hubs, collectively, we are working on a kind of pledge and a set of actions that we feel like we need to deliver, as a kind of pledge to kind of Black Lives Matter, but also really, rather than focusing, as we always do, on kind of the marginalized communities that we reference, I think it's really more about like, how do we look at our whiteness, and in the way that has referenced, really, how do we kind of get more reflective and more interrogative and more critical of what the systems and cultures are that we're kind of operating in. So initially we've just put this together, but we are doing some work in the background, but obviously there's quite a few different organisations that need to buy in terms of they've got different sort of requirements of what their freedoms are within their organisations, who they work with, how their boards are run. So there's quite a lot of work going on there, and we will keep you updated as and when that changes. At the moment, we just wanted to really flag a lot of the organisations who are doing really great work in the UK. So some of them are listed here, and if you feel like any are missing, please let us know. So these are kind of Film Audience Network members. Then there's also a lot of resources here, some of which may be hopefully familiar to you because maybe you've been doing some reading over these past few weeks and months and years. There's a great list here which has lots of film titles that you might be interested to watch and look at and potentially programme. There's anti-racism resources here. This guide is really excellent. There's just loads of stuff. I'll just show you. Can you see this Google Doc, everybody? So this doc is really brilliant. I would just really recommend you kind of work your way through it, really. That's what I'm kind of doing at the moment. There's always more to learn, right? So yeah, so make use of it. And yeah, there's just some really important messages and learning going on in there. This was something that brought to my attention a couple of years ago, which is the white privilege checklist. And I feel like it's something that everybody should go through, really, that process of just really the things that you just don't think about that that count in your favor. You know, it's just a really important kind of personal reflection moment that can really make you realize how you stand and how you can be a strong ally, even if you question that or worry at times. This is also something that's come to my attention more recently, which I found quite interesting. So the 7 Circles of Whiteness, which was created by Alicia McCulloch, which looks at sort of different levels of kind of white experience and behaviours and actions. And I think we could probably all agree that we would really like to be right down here in Circle 7, but maybe some of us are still operating on some of the actions around these. I certainly know that I have definitely done some of these things in the earlier circles, which I don't feel very proud of. So I feel like, yeah, it's really helpful to look at this as well and just kind of, yeah, be honest with yourself, you know, and think about and take some learning around how we can kind of structure our behaviour in a different way personally, and then how that can impact on the organisations, and how we can use our power in better ways with the people we're working with. There's also this resource which I just wanted to flag finally. Don't want to take up too much of the Q&A time, but this is a really great resource that is quite blunt and upfront about what white institutions should be doing and thinking about if you're looking to welcome and work with artists of colour, and some of the kind of homework that you need to do really before you start talking to people and trying to get them to participate with you. So I'm not going to go through it blow by blow, but it's a really interesting piece of work, and I would recommend everybody have a read of it, and you can purchase it. There's a sliding scale purchase based on what your kind of income or spending power is, so take a little look at that as well. I think those are the main things to share with you. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was that we are working on a resource at the moment. So we've conducted some interviews with Black and POC exhibitors, and we are kind of working on something around sort of supporting, you know, BAME audiences, audiences of colour, and how that works. But I'm also aware that that piece of work really needs to now consider impacts of COVID and what that really means for audiences. And also it really needs to kind of have a focus around interrogating whiteness and not just be kind of let's other this group and, you know, come up with strategies around how we work with people. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of homework to do first, basically. So that'll be something that we address in that resource as well. And then lastly, I guess I would just say, if there's stuff that you would find useful, if you have case studies or insights that you'd like to share, if you feel that there are things missing or things that you feel like the Film Audience Network or the hubs need to be thinking about, then I would ask you to talk to me about that, and talk to us, and talk to all your hub representatives as well, because, you know, it's our role to kind of be that conduit and also to kind of represent and support exhibition. And we want it to be an equitable place that thrives on like cultural diversity, not not what it is maybe at the moment, which is still a big work in progress. You know, we just kind of want to see things progress a little faster than they have been. I hope that's all okay. I'm going to end it there, but yeah, hit me with any questions and stuff as and when.
Perfect, thank you so much, Toki. So we're going to enter into the little Q&A, let's have a chat section of today. So if you do have any questions for any of the speakers, or just any insights yourself, please feel free to either raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can stick it in the chat. One thing that I did want to touch on first of all, and jumping off of just what Toki's touched on, particularly in light of COVID, was throwing back to Anthony at We Are Parable. I have had a wee look at some of the research that you're just beginning to undertake in terms of Black audiences and when we re-enter cinemas pre-vaccine during COVID, and how that's quite a high anxiety, low confidence situation at the moment. And I was wondering if you had any insights into what considerations, particularly exhibitors who maybe aren't venues themselves, Scalarama exhibitors, or maybe working closely with smaller venues, or we have our own events that we're somehow able to protect or proof and things. So I was just wondering if there was any insights in that you might have.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, just to give everyone some context, basically we've been on a couple of industry calls over the last couple of months about how cinemas return and open up for audiences in light of the lockdown being lifted. And obviously you look at that work being done, but then you also look at the news and the stats about Black, Asian, other ethnic groups being much more susceptible to dying from COVID. So we were asking the question, you know, what additional measures can be put in place to help, you know, to make these groups feel much more confident when they enter into cinemas? And essentially the answers back weren't really ones where we could be satisfied with, especially as you know, the main audience, the main crux of our audience are Black audiences. So we've spoken to Toki, we've spoken to a few people at the BFI who have commissioned us to do this research about audience confidence in going back to cinemas after lockdown. So we've had just shy of 1,000 responses, which has been amazing over 4 days. But what we've some of the snapshot insights that we've seen is that, you know, information is key to almost every group, but especially for Black and Asian groups, it's absolutely key. So feeling like they are completely informed about how they need to act when they're in the cinema. You know, is it a 2 meter gap? Is it a 1 meter gap? How are cinemas going to implement that? Are there going to be temperature checks? Can we bring cash? How many groups of people do we bring people with our social bubble? So really about, you know, cinemas being super clear, exhibitors being super clear about exactly how social distancing is going to work in the cinema. That seems to be the main concern. Obviously, we've got another week to go on the survey being open, but that's really you know, a key concern for audiences that we specifically speak to.
And we'll include a link to the survey. If we don't have it in our link sheet, we'll send it out after this so that hopefully other organisations within here can share that out with their audiences too. I wanted to come back to you because I thought you touched on some quite interesting points about the conversation now being at a point where it should turn. I know that we've all been in diversity and inclusion workshops and conferences and conversations for years and years now, it seems. But I was wondering, and this might be a bit personal, but do you feel that there's a level of fatigue or frustration, particularly for our Black and ethnic minority colleagues when they're having to continually undertake these conversations around diversity and inclusion and how we should be moving forward?
I would say not fatigue around the conversations happening in general. It's more how the conversations are structured. So what I mean by that is, and I don't want to say I myself are like, it's difficult. So like I run workshops myself to do with like racial diversity and inclusion and all of these things before. And I feel like we're still at a point and where we are centering white feelings, like above all, like white people need to be made comfortable while having these conversations. And because that's what we're working like from, it just like in practice, that looks like people of color doing a lot of extra emotional labor to like check their tone and not say things as bluntly as we would like to say, for example. Or give people the benefit of the doubt, or answer like very simple questions that people could Google constantly because at least they're asking. So like they're not like outright being racist, so I can't have a go at them kind of thing. But it's those things, it might be the only interaction or the only time that white people are having these conversations, but it's not the only time that we're having it. We're having these conversations constantly because we live in a predominantly white society. So it's just this sense of like just being very tired of having to prioritize the feeling of people who benefit from my oppression. Like that's a very heavy thing to have to carry. But I will say, in light of like the past, I feel like since Black Lives Matter and its recent like resurgence, I feel different in that I don't care to protect white feelings anymore, because I really don't want to be having these conversations for the rest of my career. Like I'd really like to put this to bed at some point in my life, and to do that, I think it's really like necessary for me to stop sugarcoating things and supporting other people of color to do the same. But it's really difficult. Like I wish I could say things like even what I've said today, I feel like I could have said it in a more blunt way that would reflect my feelings. It's conditioning essentially. It's like I've been conditioned not to do that because I've been conditioned to understand that that's not safe for me to do. So yeah, that's my feelings on that.
Thanks, and thanks for being so honest. I would hope that we would get to a point where a sector where we're not having to have those conversations at that pitch and making people feel unsafe, certainly not white people, around these conversations. I was going to throw to the floor in case anyone had any questions that they would like to ask themselves. This is always the really great leap into the unknown. No, wonderful. Oh no, wait, Helen Wright has asked, A little question in the chat. Seems a lot of these discussions assume that institutions want to change. I think we all know that there are people in positions of power in film exhibition institutions who do not want to change and are actively blocking it, even if they publicly say otherwise, particularly here in Scotland. I'm going to go ahead and say, how can we address that? How can we individually be held to account, particularly by funders, where it seems the responsibility should lie? I don't know, does anyone want to pick that up, Anthony? Even Toki or Claire? Do you think that people in positions of power should be held accountable by funders, and how do we hold ourselves to account? Oh, Helen is unmuted. Sorry, I'm talking over Helen.
No, it's fine. I don't need to add anything. I just want to say no one else should feel obliged to talk to that, because I know it is quite difficult, and it is the case that we all rely for our making our livings, getting paid on this work, and it's difficult to speak out about stuff. But yeah, just in case anyone else wanted to. Yeah.
I wonder how we hold them to account, because in a way one of the problems, of course, is parental funding structures where funders are kind of holding anyone to account or not is problematic. It's sort of like we need an ecological view of how we hold people to account that hasn't got the linearity of funders at the top, because as you say, often they're not doing the greatest job themselves. I wonder, like in another world, like we would turn down the money that we didn't want from the people who weren't representative enough themselves, and that's like we have to work to those things.
Anthony, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, I think what I would say, especially as an exhibitor who reaches out to and interacts with Black audiences, I think there is a sense from our peers that there can only be like one Black exhibitor who has access to the funding, and I think that is a mindset that really needs to change, and that only changes by funders being really transparent about the fact that this money is for you to attract these audiences. It's not about just one exhibitor, like the sort of golden child of all exhibition being able to get money and be able to do all these things. It's about so many people coming through the door. But I think that's a real challenge for funders to try and get past. There's a lot of exhibitors out there who feel that they just can't get access to funding because this one spot for reaching out to Black audiences is taken by someone else. So I think that's something that really needs to be challenged and hopefully dismantled.
I think just to add on to that, I think it starts with demanding transparency from funders and from organisations, because I think having the information is like the first step to challenging certain decisions that have been made. So yeah, that's my only addition. That we need to be having conversations where it's like we want more transparency, and if the people in power come back and say give reasons not to do that, then we need to challenge. It needs to be less kind of asking at this point and more demanding, because essentially if we just all stopped working, then I think they would change the issue very soon, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that there's something in that in terms of funders, because we can obviously look at the large scale, but I'm wondering for Scalarama exhibitors who are maybe these smaller exhibitors who are only organisations of 1 or 2 people and they are receiving patchy funding, what type of practical things that these types of exhibitors, and that includes Matchbox, can be doing to make these conversations easier, to facilitate these types of changes that will have a longer impact. Then just dismantle it, I think, is probably, if we start pulling it down from the ground up. To joke on that, but I do think that as independent exhibitors, and a lot of people in this room are smaller independent exhibitors who maybe are a wee bit more light-footed, who are, precarious employment situations at the time, but also we don't necessarily have to answer to larger funding bodies at all points and can make our own decisions. I think that we're seeing that a lot in response to the current situation with COVID. We saw that with hashtag cancel everything. Herb Schellenberger spearheading that, and independent exhibitors taking the choice to stop their events and shut down their venues before there was any larger organisational or government directions from that. So I think that there's a possibility for change on the micro level that will make change on the macro level. I'm hopeful. Is there any other questions from the room? There's just lots of really nice chat going on in the chat bar. We will compile all of this into a little like blog thing for everyone. So if there's no more questions from the room, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time today. I don't want to suck up too much more time, and also I think that we've heard a lot from speakers today on resources and things that we can be going about and doing ourselves, and I think that that's entirely correct, that we should be putting the emphasis on ourselves as white exhibitors to be undertaking this type of change and challenge for ourselves. And Scalarama Glasgow has just asked a question. Sean, would you like to ask a question?
I just put it into the thread. I'm not sure if it's a question or if I would welcome people's thoughts. Like I've said that for smaller white-led organisations like Matchbox is only two white people. 2 white straight people. I wonder if there's a wariness to programme films to or on behalf of Black and minority ethnic audiences, or LGBTQ+ or feminist and so on, and that we found that collaboration is the best answer to that. And I just wondered the best answer to that concern, and I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that and if that was fair to say. And that was my point.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in there, I'd say I think you've got it spot on. I think collaboration has always been something that we really subscribe to. I think if, you know, a recent example that I've seen is that, you know, a lot of sort of streaming platforms such as Netflix and Sky, they've got their Black Lives Matter programming, and every other film is, you know, a systemic murder or a horrific killing, or, you know, and it's like Black trauma everywhere. It's like we are more than Black trauma. You know, we have Black joy. We have stories of, you know, we are ordinary people. We have stories that go across the spectrum. And all we're seeing now is, the stories of crime and injustice, and those stories are very important, but they are one part of a wider experience, a lived experience of Black people. And I think by collaborating with organisations who are doing the work, who are reaching out to the community and actually are having conversations with particular groups, I think you're able to understand exactly the stories that people want to be told, rather than assuming a lot about the stories that you think should be told.
And perhaps that collaboration is where you can also think really laterally about what each of you have and how you can share skills or resources and networks across just specific programming. So it might be that there's specific skills that you have that the people you're collaborating with want, as well as the other way around. And so I think we always try to broaden out a collaborative partnership to work out how we can each be in service of each other's kind of organizational dreams as well as the programmatic dreams at that point.
Yeah, and I think the collaboration, particularly on the skills that some of the Scalarama exhibitors operate when we're slightly smaller, not only as a couple of us in the organisation, that collaboration is a way that we can start to address our own limitations of knowledge and lived experiences, and how we then present that to our audience. Because I think at the end of the day, we're all doing this because we want our audiences to come and have like really fun experiences. But if we're not presenting a wide range of experiences on the screen, then that's limiting our audiences. So if anyone's got any more questions, please do fire them in the chat. I wanted to round off because I know that it's quite a heavy conversation and particularly in the last few weeks, it's been really intense. So I just wanted to ask our contributors, what is the most joyful experience that you've been able to create or have had in the cinema? Toki, will I start with you?
Ooh, on the spot. That's quite tricky because I don't really don't have a program for quite a long time. I'm trying to cast my mind back.
Nothing is joyful, says Toki.
No, there are lots of joyful things. I'm just trying to think which is the most. I think actually for me, it's probably been those times when I've managed to get, I guess, an audience to attend who really haven't been to cinema for a really long time or felt like it wasn't for them anymore. And this has happened particularly around sort of like getting older audiences back to cinemas actually, who just really fell out of like the habits. And kind of having a kind of multi-arts approach. So having that kind of cinema as one part of an entire event, I think that always brings like a kind of richness of experience and stronger discussions and just a much more memorable time. So for me, it's been those moments that like when you see that sort of real spark of like, yeah, and you think that they're going to come back again. That would be mine.
And Claire, joyful Watershed experience?
I also just felt extremely like my brain just shut down because I like the idea of even being together in space at the moment feels so far away from anything that is possible. That there hasn't been so much joy recently, but we did work fairly recently on the musical season with Compass Presents, and I thought of it because there are some similarities between the We Are Parable work around Compass's kind of forefronting of the experiential, and so we did a flash mob singing in the rain dance in the harbour side, and that was like just seeing people who'd actually practiced. I had not practiced, who'd actually practiced and were dancing with umbrellas, was like, oh, to be together in space thinking about cinema.
Thank you, Claire. And we've just had a really good question from Joe in the chat, and not to flip and be like to and Anthony, but Joe has asked if your experiences as a person of colour or Black should define your programming or how you are approaching programming, and also what is your joyful experience? Oh no. There you go.
I mean, it definitely, it's a difficult thing because I think like thinking of like an ideal situation, I think like who we are as people should inform our programming, because I think that's like there's a richness in that we can draw from. The issue is when only people of color are expected to like specialize in films that are related to them, because it does like put you in a box, so to speak, and that it might not kind of marry up with your personal like the genres or whatever, the kinds of films that you are personally attracted to. So I think people should be like driven by what like naturally like draws them, and I think naturally like who we are as people feeds into that, but that should be something that everybody like has a chance to do. And joyful experiences, I really struggled with this as well, which is terrible to say, but I did think back to when I was working at Chapter, and one day I think it was Isle of Dogs had come out, and I was working on an animation season at the time, and everyone in the office just went and watched the film, and it was really lovely. So yeah, I mean, I feel like as programmers we really get the chance to just go and watch film and enjoy it for what it is, so it was nice to do that like with my colleagues.
Oh, I can't wait to get back to the cinema. And Anthony, do you have any insight? And Joe asks, as a BME person, should programming inform, or your background inform your programming? And also, what is your most joyful We Are Parable experience?
I'm going to be greedy and ask for two really joyful experiences. So in order to answer the first question, I think it's almost impossible to separate your background from your programming ability, in my opinion. And I do agree with Rom in many senses that, Black people are often encouraged or, expected to only program Black films. One thing that I've always really wanted to do is do a Edgar Wright ice cream trilogy experiential event, and that's something that I really want to do. But whether the anticipation or expectation of what we're supposed to do fits in with what I'd love to do is another thing. But I do think your background is Toki, got one attendee, that's great. But no, definitely I think it's really hard to separate the two. But I think there are occasions where, certainly as a programmer myself, I definitely want to break out of doing just one thing and actually celebrate the whole sort of spectrum of what I'm interested in as a film fan. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. In terms of two joyous moments, so the first one was, again, the musical season. So what we did for musicals, we had a season called The Art of the Black Visual Album, where we celebrated visual albums by Black artists. And one thing we did was celebrate Purple Rain, but we had a live Prince tribute band play in an Art Deco cinema in South London to an audience of about 200 people. So we showed the film and then we played Prince hits all night. So to have a live band on stage playing music was just like, it was like a proper pinch yourself moment, and people just dancing in the aisles. It was like truly just like a spectacular night. So that was one. And then the second one was, again, last year for Blue Story. We did a preview of Blue Story at BFI South Bank. And if any of you guys have seen Blue Story, it's kind of like a film of two halves. The first half is very playful, very joyful, just, being a teenager in London, running around, going to different parties and stuff. And in that part, there's a scene with the main characters, and they're in the they're partying, and there's one guy who's trying to dance with a girl, and it's this real comedic moment. And the sound, the cacophony of sound that came up from that moment, and I just looked around and it was just all Black faces looking back at me, and I was like, that's why we do what we do. Going back to what I said earlier, it's about creating spaces for our audience, not feeling like they have to wear a black tie and shoes to go to the BFI, but feeling like, I'm going to the BFI, I'm going to be around people who make me feel safe, who make me feel confident, and see a film that represents me on stage. Like, that was a real, like, almost a tear came to my eye, because I was like, that's why we do what we do. So that was a real sort of like pinch yourself moment as well. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Anthony. What a great note to wrap up on. So I just want to thank all of my guests today. Sorry, my cat just like spat at me. Thank all of my guests today, Anthony, Claire and Toki, and for all of your insights. I hope that everyone that has been in the room today takes away something with them today. And if you have any friends or colleagues who would like to access the recording, we'll be posting it on the Matchbox website with transcripts and captions. If there is anyone in the conversation today that you would like to connect with, please do reach out, or you can reach out to myself or Sean, and we'll be happy to do email introductions and connect people up. The next Scalarama session will be on the 19th of July, and our next session will focus on accessibility events both for online and in venue. We'll be joined by Alison Smith, who works across various festivals in Glasgow, including Squiff and Take One Action, to increase access. So I just want to thank everybody so much for participating today and for everyone's insights. And I hope you have a good Sunday. So thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much, Anthony, Claire, Toki. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
And now it's like the awkward zoom in, because you're like, people are still saying like thank you, and you're just like waiting, and it's rude to leave. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
See you later.